Tonight, we are talking about a case that absolutely shook Bulgaria. This is possibly every parent's worst nightmare. Two sisters, Rositsa and Hristina Belneyski, murdered on January night in 2006.
Welcome to the Profiling Brothers. We're here to examine the crime by understanding the mind behind it. Make sure you stay till the end where we'll talk about the psychology behind tonight's crime. On this channel, we dig into why people commit crimes. Not just what happened, but why it happened. We look at the facts, the timeline, the psychology, and the behavioral patterns that led to a tragedy.
I'm Paul. I'll take you through the facts and the timeline.
And I'm Martin. I'll focus on the behavioral profiling and psychological patterns. Between us, we've got years of experience in psychology-related fields, working with trauma, behavior, and decision-making in real-world settings. We don't do shock headlines, and we don't forget that these are real people with real families. What we do is tell stories with respect and accuracy. We explain the warning signs that were missed, the pattern that emerged, and what we can learn to prevent future harm. Because our goal isn't to judge or speculate, it is to understand, to raise awareness, and to treat every victim with the dignity and respect they deserve. So let's get into it.
Tonight, we are talking about a case that absolutely shook Bulgaria. This is possibly every parent's worst nightmare. Two sisters, Rositsa and Hristina Belneyski, murdered on January night in 2006. So let's start with who they were. The Belneyski family lived in an apartment block near the railway station in Pazardzhik. That's a city in southern Bulgaria. They weren't wealthy, just regular working class family trying to get by. The parents, Fanny and Stoiman, had two daughters. Rositsa, the older one, was 18. Everyone who knew her described her the same way, modest, cheerful and full of life. Her younger sister Hristina was 15. The same thing. Happy kid, well-behaved, got along with everyone, never caused any trouble. They had a loving home. Their parents worked hard to give them what they could. But here is something important. Neither girl had a mobile phone. The family just couldn't afford it. Keep that in mind, because it matters later. On Thursday, January 26, Rositsa made plans with some classmates. They wanted to hit up a nightclub called Wargo in the town center, and Rositsa asked if she could bring Hristina along. Now, Fanny and Stoiman, like any good parents, they were protective, but they said yes. The catch? The girls had to call from the public phone at the railway station when they were ready to come home. That way their parents could meet them. Friday evening rolls around. The apartment's buzzing with energy. You know how it is when teenage girls are getting ready for a night out. Rositsa and Hristina spent hours on their hair, their makeup, their outfits. The plan was to meet Rositsa classmates in the city center at 10:30 p.m, not far from the Wargo Club. Around 8:30, the sisters headed out. When they got to the meeting spot, several friends were already waiting. But there was a problem. Hristina and one of the other girls were minors, so they had no ID. They were worried they wouldn't get into the club. After talking it over, the group changed plans. They decided to go to a nearby cafe instead, somewhere they could all get in without any hassle. Around midnight, everyone decided it was time to wrap things up and head home. Some of Rositsa's friends offered to walk the sisters home, but they said no. They'd just catch the bus. The stop wasn't far. They'd be fine. So Rositsa and Hristina set off towards the bus stop. But they missed the last bus for the night. So they kept walking, trying to get home on foot through the dark, frozen streets of Pazardzhik. And somewhere in those empty streets, they ran into Lazar Kolev. Remember that name, because what he did is so disturbing it's almost hard to comprehend. To understand what happened next, we need to talk about who Lazar Kolev was. In January 2006, Kolev was 24 years old. He already had a lengthy criminal record, multiple convictions for serious offenses including rape. Eventually, he was released from prison in October 2003. After getting out, he tried to get his life together. His uncle owned a bakery and gave him a job. By all accounts, Kolev was actually a decent worker, showed up on time and didn't miss shifts without calling. But his personal life, that was a mess. He couldn't form normal relationship. In 2005, he had a brief affair with a married woman that ended when her husband got out of prison. After that, Kolev started a relationship with a 12-year-old girl. Kolev also had a deeply disturbing sexual history. According to court records and psychological evaluations, he preferred violent anal sex. He'd engaged in sexual activity with his 12-year-old girlfriend. While he was in prison, he also has been involved in violent homosexual encounters. On the evening of Friday, January 27th, Kolev was supposed to work the night shift at his uncle's bakery. His shift started around 8 p.m. He never showed up. Instead, Kolev had been drinking. He got in his car and started driving through the empty streets of Pazardzhik. Alone, after midnight, now technically Saturday, January 28th, the streets were deserted. The temperature had dropped to minus 15 degrees Celsius. That's when he saw them, Rositsa and Hristina, walking along the sidewalk trying to get home. Kolev pulled over. He stopped his car. What happened next, we know from forensics evidence, witness testimony from a fellow inmate Kolev later confessed to, and the trial records. Kolev offered the girls a ride. We don't know exactly what he said, but the evidence suggests he was friendly, maybe even charming. The girls, cold, tired, just wanting to get home, they agreed. They got in his car. Kolev struck up a conversation. He learned they were sisters, made small talk, acting like he was just a nice guy offering help. But in his alcohol-fueled state, something shifted. He later told fellow inmate that he thought the girls were easy, that they were the type who might be open to sexual adventure. This was of course complete garbage, a projection of his own twisted mind. Rositsa and Hristina were modest, well-behaved girls who'd never been in any kind of trouble. Kolev didn't care. He didn't care about the truth. He'd already decided what he wanted to do. At some point, Kolev separated the sisters. He left Hristina with another man, someone who was never identified. Kolev mentioned this person to the inmate he confessed to, but we still don't know who this accomplice was. Then Kolev drove off with Rositsa, away from anyone who might see. What happened next is deeply disturbing. I'm only going to tell you part of it. The details are too graphic for YouTube, but you can find our full video with all the details on our Patreon, where nothing is held back. Kolev started removing Rositsa's clothing. She fought back. He took off her underwear. She was left wearing only her short black skirt. Kolev, ignoring her screams, forced himself on her. First, he anally raped her. The forensic evidence confirmed it. The autopsy found seminal fluid in her rectum, proving Kolev had ejaculated inside her. Rositsa fought. Despite being completely overpowered, Kolev was bigger, stronger, violent. She pushed him, scratched him, tried to get away, but Kolev was brutal. He punched her repeatedly in the face and the body, squeezed her shoulders and chest so hard he left deep bruises, held her down, and then he raped her again. The forensic evidence showed massive bruising and bleeding. Rositsa's body told the whole story. Defensive wounds on the back of the hands, her wrists, her forearms. She tried to protect herself. Bruises on her shoulders, the chest, where he pinned her down. When he was done, Kolev got back in the driver's seat. Rositsa, traumatized, covered in blood and in unimaginable pain, realized this was her only chance. While Kolev was driving, she made a split-second decision. She opened the car door and jumped out, while the car was still moving. She hit the pavement hard, multiple injuries to her face, head and legs. Her head was covered in blood, but she was still breathing, still conscious. Kolev immediately stopped the car, got out, walked over to where Rositsa was lying on the ground, bleeding, barely able to move. And he realized, if she survived, she'd identify him. With his record, especially his rape conviction, He knew what would happen, and the thought terrified him. So he decided to kill her. Standing over Rositsa, this injured, bleeding 18-year-old, Kolev started beating her, punching her repeatedly in the face and the body, kicking her with brutal force. At some point, he picked up a blunt object. Court records suggest it was probably a baseball bat, and he hit her in the head and the chest, over and over. The autopsy later revealed the extent of her injuries: 4 wounds to her head, her skull fractured at the base, massive brain damage, broken nose, fractured jaw, marks suggesting strangulation, bruising on her chest, front and back, lung damage, blood in her airways, signs of asphyxiation. The combination caused severe internal and external bleeding. Her death wasn't quick. It was brutal, and it took time. After killing Rositsa, Kolev faced another problem: Hristina. The younger sister had been left with that unidentified man. She knew her sister had been with Kolev. If Hristina lived, she'd connect him with Rositsa's murder. So Kolev decided he had to kill her too. He loaded Rositsa's body into his car and drove wherever he'd left Hristina. When he found her, she was naked. She'd clearly been sexually assaulted by the other man. Kolev, already in a violent frenzy, attacked her, hit her repeatedly in the face and the body. Despite trying to resist, she eventually became incapacitated, unable to fight back. Kolev then raped her. After that, he put her in his car along with her clothing and decided to transport the bodies somewhere far from the city, somewhere they wouldn't be found quickly. Kolev drove to a place called Gromadice, a remote area about 30 kilometers from Pazardzhik. The ground was covered with patches of old, hard snow. It was isolated, a steep rocky slope next to the dirt road. He drove down the road and stopped at a rocky clearing. He dragged Hristina out of the car. Even after everything, the savage beating, the rape, she was still alive, showing weak movements, shallow breaths. Kolev dragged her up the rocky slope, turned her face down on the ground, and then he started striking her head, pressing her face into the frozen earth, held her there, suffocating her, crushing her skull against the ground. Once he was sure both sisters were dead, Kolev arranged the bodies. He left Rositsa lying on her back on the rocky clearing near the edge of the slope. Hristina's body was left face down about 30 meters away. Then Kolev got back in his car and drove away, leaving the bodies of Rositsa and Hristina Belneyski in the freezing darkness of Gromadice. Saturday morning arrives. Fanny and Stoyman discovered their daughters hadn't come home. They were worried, obviously, but they figured maybe it got late, and the girls decided to stay at friend's place. Remember, no mobile phones. They couldn't just call. Fanny went to work. Later that day, she and her husband traveled to a nearby village for a family member's engagement ceremony. They stayed the night at the relative's house. Sunday morning, they traveled back home to Pazardzhik. The girls still weren't there. Now Fanny started calling friends and relatives, but nobody had seen them. Monday morning, the parents filed a missing persons report with the police. The police started an investigation, but at that stage, there wasn't much to go on. The girls could have run away, though that seemed unlikely, could have been in an accident, or the worst possibility, they could have been abducted or harmed. The police made inquiries, but no witnesses and no leads. The search moved slowly. Thursday, January 31st, started as a routine day for Georgy Hristov, a shepherd who lived near Peshchera. He was out tending his goats, leading them to pasture in the area around Gromadice. As he walked through that remote location, he suddenly saw something that made his blood run cold. The body of a young woman lying on the ground. He called the police immediately. The call came into Peshchera's regional police department around 3 p.m. A patrol was dispatched right away. At 4:34 p.m., officers arrived at the scene. What they found was horrific. Not one body, 2. Both young women, both partially clothed, both showing signs of severe trauma. The first body, later identified as Rositsa, was on the rocky clearing. The second, Hristina, was about 30 meters away. Scattered around the area were items of clothing. The bodies were photographed extensively. Because their identities weren't immediately known, their hands were fingerprinted at the scene. Then they were transported to the Department of Forensics Medicine at Pazardzhik Hospital for autopsy. That evening, Fanny was called to the police station. They said they needed to ask her a few more questions. After speaking with the officers, they told her, based on the clothing and the physical description, they believed they'd found the bodies of Rositsa and Hristina. The police didn't allow the parents to see the bodies because of the state they were in. Instead, they asked Fanny's brother and his wife to verify their identity. A few months later, Fanny shared that even to this day, her brother and his wife couldn't sleep because of the nightmare they saw in that morgue. In Pazardzhik, investigators were working around the clock to identify the killer or killers. Given the sexual nature of the crime, one of the first steps was to identify all known sex offenders in the area, particularly those with prior rape convictions. Lazar Kolev's name came up immediately, but he wasn't the only suspect. Police systematically interviewed every man in the region with a record for sexual offenses. They also started taking DNA samples. At that point, Bulgarian law enforcement was starting to use DNA profiling more routinely. A national DNA database was built. Every convicted sex offender was asked to provide a sample. One of those men was Lazar Kolev. But there was a problem. During the initial autopsy, the victim's hands had been fingerprinted using ink. Their fingertips were covered in black ink for identification purposes. This ink made it difficult to immediately test the material under their fingernails for DNA. In 2006, the labs didn't have experience testing nail clippings contaminated with fingerprint ink. They were worried that trying to extract DNA from the ink-covered nails might destroy the evidence without getting any results. So they waited, conducted experiments with test samples, refined their technique, kept the nail clippings properly preserved. Meanwhile, other DNA testing was being done. Swabs from the girls were sent to the Bulgarian Forensics Laboratory, the ABA lab, and a UK forensic lab. The test identified partial semen samples, but at the time, it wasn't enough to build a full DNA profile. Nearly 3 years after the murder, November 25, 2008, experts finally felt confident in their lab's technique. They tested the nail clippings and managed to extract enough material to run a DNA profile. They searched the national database and they found a match: Lazar Kolev. On February 4, 2009, after an extensive investigation, prosecutors formally charged Lazar Kolev with 2 counts of murder and 2 counts of rape. The trial began in 2011 at the Pazardzhik District Court. It was lengthy and complex, hundreds of pages of evidence, dozens of witnesses, multiple expert testimonies. Through it all, Kolev maintained his innocence. On June 7, 2011, the Pazardzhik District Court delivered its verdict: guilty on all counts. Kolev was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Lazar Kolev is currently serving his sentence in a Bulgarian maximum security prison. He will remain there until his death. I have a lot of questions. You guys probably have as well. Martin will try to build a profile of the people involved through our questions. I hope I ask everything you are thinking about, but if I miss something, make sure you put it in the comments below. So, Martin, the biggest question here is, why so much rage? The sisters were brutally beaten. He could have easily just killed them. I know it sounds terrible, but it's true. Instead, he opted to essentially torture them to death.
I completely agree. It's a terrible situation. And now what happened that night and the level of violence he used, I think it tells us something very specific. And in my opinion, the extreme violence usually doesn't come from calm thinking. And it most often comes from rage, loss of control, and fear of being exposed, which in that case it's probably what he was feeling at the time. And that kind of behavior suggests that once control begins to slip, anger takes over, and the violence become his way to silence her, to dominate her and erase that resistance she was showing. And this is probably why so many people would ask, well, why so much rage? Well, because for someone like him, the victim is no longer seen as a person and they just become an object standing in the way of control. And when that control is threatened, like the situation of that night, this is the response, and that response can become very explosive. Uh, also, reading some of that information about that night, what stands to me is the reaction of Rositsa and the action she's taking during that attack shows something that matters deeply.
What is that?
Well, she showed will to survive, and I think most of us will do the same. Fortunately, not many of us have been in that situation, but when someone is, that's all they can do. They can show will to survive, and her attempt to escape tells me that she understood the dangers and she tried to escape and act on it. And that's not a weakness, that's a courage under the unimaginable fear. And her response was a human, instinctive and brave. And this is a very, very natural human response of when we're in any kind of danger, really.
Right, so essentially what you're saying is that when someone doesn't see another person as a person, they are capable of exercising extreme violence and a lot of rage towards that person because they see it as more as an object rather than a person. Is that what you're trying to say?
Absolutely, and you have to see it from his point of view. At that time, she was threatening him to speak, to tell other people, to tell the police, tell the parents. And once he finished with what he was doing, at that time he felt threatened that if she get away, she'll be able to expose him, and then obviously that puts him in a danger. And people like him see only one way of getting away from this, and that's by removing her and stopping her from being able to talk.
And that actually only happened in his head, isn't it? Because there is no evidence in the whole case which suggests that she ever said anything like "I'm going to go to the police, I'm going to tell," etc., etc. It was just him imagining a situation which can aggravate his state, and therefore he decided to kill her.
Yes, I mean, maybe what he did, because as you know, he's done a lot to her. He's done very brutal things to her that night. And in his head, the only thing she would have done is to talk to someone. Now, maybe there is another option, and that's just me thinking loud, is that maybe he planned to kill her all along that night. Maybe that was his plan already. When she jumped to that car trying to save herself, maybe that's what clicked, and he just murdered her violently.
Right. But then there is one more thing, because yes, this is in his head that this is the only thing she could do, like going to police and talking to people. But the statistic says that the majority of the victims of rape don't actually tell anyone. So is that more like in his head, and why would victims not report crime like that? Is it shame or something else?
It can be a lot of things. Now, with a lot of the victims can be shame. With a lot of them, they feel like nobody's gonna believe them. And by speaking to someone, first, maybe they feel embarrassed by talking about this. Because when a victim goes through this situation of being abused, beaten, raped, they do feel ashamed. A lot of the time they feel it's their fault because the abuser make it look like it's their fault or make them feel like it's their fault. And a lot of the victims just prefer to stay quiet because it's easier, less to explain. You don't have to go back to that time when the assault happened. So it's easier not to talk about it instead of going and talking about this to other people, having to repeat yourself, having to take your memory back to that night. So a lot of the victims just stay quiet, unfortunately, and that's why a lot of the abusers get away from this.
Right. Then I have another question. So If Kolev had 12 years old child as a girlfriend, does that make him a pedophile?
Well, this is probably a question many people ask themselves when they look at that case. Was Lazar actually a pedophile? And especially considering the age of the sisters. Now, to answer this, probably we need to be very precise with the psychological terms and to avoid any assumptions. Now, what pedophile actually means, and pedophilia is a specific clinical term and it refers to a persistent and primary sexual attraction to children. Now, usually they're under the age of 11 and it's identified by considered preference for children over adults. Based on what I've seen publicly, that's all just publicly known information. This pattern doesn't clearly apply here with Lazar. Now, why the age of the sisters matters, but not the way the people think, is because the sisters were young, but they were adolescents, and in profiling terms, that distinction matters because many violent offenders are not attracted to the age by itself, but to vulnerability of the children. Youth can represent inexperience, lower physical power, and higher chance of compliance, which make control easier.
But then, before that, he had a married woman as a, as a partner. Is that not pretty much contradicting the pattern?
Well, just because he had a girlfriend who's older than the previous one doesn't really cancel the violence or the abusive behavior, nor does confirm the pedophilia. Many offenders live dual lives, and many maintain seemingly normal adult relationship while separately acting on fantasies driven by power, control, or even entitlement. This is called compartmentalization, and it's very common in violent offenders. It can also feel confusing as well because people expect a clean pattern, such as only targeting one age group, but in power-based offenders, the pattern is not age, it's access, opportunity, and even control. And the consistent factor is the vulnerability of the children in that case, and it's not a specific number. From behavioral profiling perspective, this case aligns more closely with the power-driven offending rather than the pedophilia. And the focus appears to be domination, control, and emotional regulation through the violence. And it's not just fixed sexual preference for children, in my opinion. So to be clear and of course responsible of what we say, there's no solid evidence to label Lazar as a pedophile. What we do see is a pattern considered with the violent offenders who target vulnerability and use power and control regardless of the age. And that distinction matters because accuracy matters, especially when we talk about real victims and real crimes.
Right. Can we talk about the person that abused Hristina, that second accomplice? What goes in the mind of such person?
Now, for me, what happened to Hristina remains one of the most disturbing parts of this case. And the unknown leaves space for endless questions for all of us. Now, we don't really know for a fact if second person was involved in the actual murder of either of the sisters, but what we do know is that second DNA was found on the crime scene. But let's say if there was a second person involved, they probably likely live with one of their psychological states. One could be either deep guilt and fear or even emotional detachment that people build to survive the knowledge of what happened. Or silence does not always mean peace, often means lifelong psychological imprisonment. And maybe he's feeling guilty of what happened if he took part of the actual crime, or maybe he doesn't even feel anything. We'll never really know for a fact. There's also another possibility. Maybe he was only involved with the rape, but not the murder, right? I can't really tell a lot more about this person because I don't have any information for him, so it will be speculation on my side.
Right. But, okay, well, let's assume that still there was a second person. Do you think that second person is still haunted till today by his involvement, given the magnitude of the case?
Now, it really depends on the person, to be honest. I've seen some people who will, not personally, but I've seen stories for some people, serial killers, where they will go commit crime, a gruesome crime, go back home, sleep like nothing happened. And then you have the other type of murderers who commit the crime and will feel guilty. They will regret what they do, until they do it again. So it could be either way. And like I said, I wish we knew a lot more about this second person, because it would have been interesting to find out how their brain works. But unfortunately we don't. So he could be sleeping very nicely in his bed every night, or maybe he's feeling guilt every single night for the rest of his life.
It's very difficult to imagine that someone would forget this, but I guess you're right. Okay, well, do you think there is something concerning about the gurus' behavior? Do they put themselves in dangerous situation? I think a lot of people would think, well, you know, you're getting out late, you very young girls on their own. Is that something that actually caused or helped for that crime to actually happen?
No, not really. And why? Well, because what I see from their behavior, it's extremely normal behavior for their age. And the Belneyski sisters, they were young, trusting, and they were at that stage of their life where curiosity and the social connection really matters. I think it matters for all of us when we're their age. And just like many teenagers and young adults, they believe they could possibly read people well enough to stay safe. And I don't think they thought about there's a reason why they shouldn't believe someone they saw that night. I don't think they were even considering that maybe they're walking into a danger. This is important because the victims are often judged unfairly after the facts, and even though nothing about their behavior was unusual for their age.
Okay, yeah, well, something really strange to me and probably everyone else is why the parents waited for 3 days to report the missing girls.
Well, I don't think they did anything wrong at that time, maybe not at first, but it is more normal than you think actually. Now, Fanny and Streamer.
3 days?
Well, like many parents, I guess they trusted their daughter at that time. They were trusting they're capable of making everyday decision. And I don't think they really have any concern at that time because there was no immediate sign that something was wrong. Now, when people disappear, family often assumes delays, misunderstanding, or they even think that there was always a normal explanation at first. Panic doesn't always arrive instantly, and it builds slowly, and what's sad is that usually when it's too late, that's when the people start assuming something is wrong.
Right, I get it. Well, another one is justice took many years until Kolev was finally convicted, like 5, 6 years. How the parents lived with this pain for so long?
Oh, that's not an easy question, and I'll tell you why. Because I've watched so many interviews with the parents. Now, the first one I watched was with the mum and the dad of the sisters, and they were both heartbroken. They were living, but it was more like existing, not actual living. And they were very sad. They were trying to move on, even though it was impossible for them to do so. And it wasn't long before actually I watched another interview, and it was only with the mum. The dad unfortunately passed away, and what Fanny said is that he couldn't live without the daughters. He couldn't move on, and all the sadness in his heart is what killed him. And that's very sad, but unfortunately with a lot of parents, when they lose a child, which is not a normal thing, it's not normal for the parents to send their child first. Fanny, she adopted a young girl. Well, they adopted it when the dad was still alive, but now she's just with the little girl she adopted, and she said she's the only reason why I can live and I can move on, even though we will never forget our daughters. But she's something that we have in our life that keeps us going until Streaman passed away. And now I guess she's got something to live for, and that's her adopted daughter.
Right, so essentially Kolev had 3 victims rather than 2, right?
Yes, and it happens a lot of the times. You take one life and then 5 others were destroyed. Sometimes they end up with tragedy. So yes.
Do you think this could have been prevented?
Possibly, but not easy.
Why?
Well, because there was no obvious warning signs that could have stopped the sister from trusting him or go out to meet their friends that night. And this is the hardest truth. And a lot of the crimes happen not because people ignore danger, but because danger hides pretty well.
And finally, what can we learn from this case?
What we could learn from this case is it needs to teach us something uncomfortable but very important, and that's evil doesn't always look threatening. Sometimes it looks ordinary. And understanding this case is not about excusing the killer, but it's about recognizing this pattern of control, power seeking, and emotional instability. So many of the future warning signs can be seen earlier, and trust can be balanced with caution. Understanding the mind does not mean forgiving the act, and what it means learning how to protect others. And cases like this remind us of something extremely uncomfortable, actually, and that is the danger doesn't always look dangerous. And I think it also a fair point here is to say that understanding criminal behavior doesn't mean forgiving them, but it means recognizing the pattern, questioning assumptions, and learning how tragedies like this might be prevented in the future. If this video made you think, that's the point. Understanding the mind doesn't excuse the crime. It helps to prevent the next one. Subscribe to our channel to get notification when the new video is uploaded.
Thank you for being with us, guys. See you in the next episode, and don't forget, do not go gentle into that good night.
Stay safe.